The following program is a production of Pioneer Public Television.
Hello and welcome to Compass. Have you ever dreamed of starting your own business? Many people have, but it can be tough to know where to start. This week on Compass, we will look at the first steps in starting a small business and talk about what kind of resources are available to start it right. Liz Struvia is with us. Liz is the director of the Small Business Development Center on the campus of Southwest State University in Marshall. And Robin Weiss is with us as well. She's the Economic Development Director for the Southwest Regional Development Center in Slayton. Liz, Robin, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There are a lot of ways we could go with this, of course, because it's such a big topic, but I just want to focus in first on both of you and your agency. So Liz, if I could start with you, Small Business Development Center in Marshall, what do you do to help small businesses get started?
We work with small businesses, and very early on, oftentimes one of the first things that we would suggest is perhaps looking at a feasibility study. And then we very quickly move on to the financial piece. There was a time where we worked right away on a narrative and trying to put those pieces together to find out at a later time that their financials were not sufficient enough to be able to go into business. And so those are the first two things that the Small Business Development Center really does as far as assisting someone that's looking. And most times I would say 90% of the time someone coming through our center has actually been referred by a different lender, a banker or RDC or whatnot, and they are looking for financing. It's not very often that someone comes through our center that is not in need or already has that in place.
Okay, and Robin at the RDC in Slayton, tell me about your work.
I'm going to focus a little bit more probably on the Economic Development Division at the Southwest Regional Development Commission in terms of helping businesses. One of the components that I am in charge of would be the Revolving Loan Fund, or we call it the RLF. The Revolving Loan Fund is basically a gap financing source for business expansion, business implementation. Okay. Certainly we're not a primary lender, and oftentimes primary lenders can't fund the entire request of a business expansion or implementation, and there's a gap. So that's where the Regional Development Commission Revolving Loan Fund can come into place. Now keep in mind they still choose their own lender. We have to have their own lender. We are not a primary lender, but again, we get some of those projects off the ground that would not have been able to because of the gap in financing. The second piece that I'm going to talk a little bit about is the Property Assessed Clean Energy Program, or the PACE program. It's an energy financing source for improvements. So if a business would like to put new windows in, new heating, new cooling, new insulation, if they want to get into solar or wind, anything that would save on energy and they don't have the financing up front to do that, we have the PACE Revolving Loan Fund for that as well.
Yeah, so it's not just about starting a small business for either one of you. It's if there is a business, taking them to the next level, to an expansion, perhaps a relocation, all of those kind of things also come under your purview as well.
Yes, perfect.
So let's just back up a bit to the dream stage, because people often have a dream of a small business that they're thinking of. You mentioned lending, that's an important part of it. Yeah. But before they even get to that part, where should they start? If they're thinking, oh gee, I've always wanted to do this, where should they start? Liz, I'll ask you first.
I think that most of the time, by the time a client would come through the SBDC, they oftentimes may perhaps be looking at an existing business and have been offered the opportunity to purchase that, or have a pretty good idea what it is that they would like to pursue. And so I think that with the ability for people to go online now and to do some research about different types of businesses, we don't have the questions from people that we once did that would come in and be looking in the library that we had within the SBDC. Oftentimes they come in and have an idea and they believe that they're ready to move forward, but the reality is that they've just begun.
Sure, and I suppose that's another thing is they may have an idea and they've done more research than they would have 20 years ago.
Yes.
But there are still a lot of things that they need to do. So are you finding that as they come into you, do you find sometimes folks maybe come in too late, that they should have come in earlier?
Probably more that people are coming to us and they really haven't prepared. So when I'm providing them with my application and our application checklist, and when I get to the business plan and for 3-year projections, and they kind of wonder, something I haven't thought about, that's just an indication that they haven't thought that part through. We certainly want them to be realistic in their projections. We want to be honest in the financials that we see, and we really want to push them down a road of success.
And I suppose in some cases, if you're looking at, because you're both dealing with a lot of people in small towns or on farms, and so they may have an idea where they want to start the business because they may have plenty of room on the farm or an empty business location in a town, but it's also figuring out if it's something unconventional, where do they get the money and where do they start? And I suppose, Liz, you've seen some pretty unconventional ideas come through, I suppose.
We definitely have. And I think that oftentimes you do have to take that step back and give them the opportunity to talk it through and to come to the realization sometimes on their own that they may be quite a ways off from actually moving forward with it. Oftentimes those more unconventional types of businesses may have a pretty hefty price tag on trying to get into that sector, and oftentimes that's a surprise to the client as well.
And in some cases, do you find, I suppose, that some of these folks, they may be in a business that's easier to start small than others? For example, people go into the restaurant business, when they're open, and it's all got to be there. Where if they're doing something that's online or mail order, they may be able to start small and do a little bit day to day. So are you seeing those kinds of differences as well?
Certainly. We have lots of different types of businesses that come forward.
Yes. And I think now, too, with the internet and the ability for different types, not only just the research, as we mentioned earlier, but the ability to start different types of business or to have researched and found some that perhaps in rural southwest Minnesota people hadn't thought of yet. And that sparks the interest, and they start that process of doing some research and looking into how it might work in a rural area, if at all.
Yeah, so as you think about rural areas and where the product is produced or where the business is and where their customers are, Robin, are you finding, I'll ask you first, are you finding examples of people who, they're working in southwestern Minnesota, but that's not where their market is, right?
Yep. I think that we really try to push our businesses maybe to the next level. So if they haven't thought about online sales, if they haven't thought about their workforce, if they haven't thought about their location, if they haven't thought about all of the details in their business, we just try to want them to step back a little bit and think more clearly about that.
So as you think about these businesses, are there some things that you often see from the years you've been doing this, things that people really do well and some very common mistakes? I'd like to start with the common mistakes. So Liz, what are the most common things you think that people should do that they're not?
I believe that when I look at clients that come through the SBDC, and we have about 300 a year, 150 of those, we usually go about 50-50 are looking at starting a business, and the others are existing businesses seeking help for various reasons. But I would say the number one thing that when we're looking at going into business and when they come in, what the process is and where they may have fallen behind is that they don't understand, they haven't done the planning, they don't understand the need that the financing piece of it is always, if anything's going to shut down a potential small business owner, it's going to be the lack of equity that is needed to put into the project. And the things that they've often done right, and Robin said this earlier, so I'm gonna, since I couldn't think of anything, but I agreed, and she said they come in and they do have that enthusiasm, and that's important too, because it's a long road. It isn't, it isn't something that you're going to come in and meet with the RDC or the SBDC and that you're going to be in business the next month. And that's often something that we have to really slow people down and make them realize there's a lot of planning and a lot of research yet to be done. And we help them through that process and putting a plan together. And oftentimes we might have someone that comes in that thinks they're going to start the next week because someone's going to sell a building and everything's in a rush, and we're just like, there was a time where the SBDC would do anything we could to, hurry up and do a business plan and do it on the weekend. We don't anymore. I mean, that just isn't successful. You need to step back and really put, a lot of time into researching and going and checking out other businesses in similar size communities and see what they're doing right or what they're doing wrong.
And so in other words, patience.
Absolutely.
Because the research isn't the fun part, right?
No.
People have to spend the time in the research. And what about, since you mentioned money, and of course there's always about where do you go for lenders, and you mentioned that there's some of these revolving loan funds. But the other part is it that people often underestimate in a business how many years that they may have to be ready to capitalize. I know for restaurants years ago, one number I heard was 3 years.
3 years.
Are those guys?
It's often 2-3 years before the turning point of making it in the black versus the red.
Which lends to the old saying, "Don't give up your day job," right?
Exactly. It does help if a spouse has another job, bringing in some money as well as some benefits.
Yeah. So for most people, they're looking at time of research, 2 to 3 years before they get necessarily to the cash position that they want to be in. And then also understanding a lot of the different things that they may need to know. Because I've also heard it said that if you've got 3 major categories, your specialty, your finance, and then your marketing, that somebody's going to be weak on those 3. So do you find that as well, that often people have a weakness and they may not necessarily assess what that weakness is or how to get the help on it?
Yeah, I certainly see business people, like Liz said, all excited and gung-ho about getting their business started, and some think that they can do it all because they may make more money. We see burnout in that case. We see some financial books that maybe don't look very accurate. We see marketing holes where they could have jumped into some opportunities. So yes, you can't be everything to everybody, and certainly some of those things that I try to make sure businesses know about is making sure their financial piece is taken care of. If you're not good at that, make sure you're hiring out that assistant. Maybe you're hiring somebody in to do that, whatever the case would be there. And marketing is a really big thing. If people don't know that you're there, even on your own main street, how are other people going to know to travel to you or to purchase online? The other piece that I really am telling small businesses that if they need employees, our unemployment rate is so low here. If we put out an ad for somebody wanting a job, or we want a job, there's only a half a person available for every job posting in our region. So oftentimes part-time work is very difficult, very challenging, and sometimes the work ethic is changing a little bit, and we're seeing businesses notice that. The other thing that I am trying to tell businesses really early on is succession planning. And I know we're talking about buying businesses, expanding businesses, and so forth, but succession planning is so key, and we want people to start to realize that we need to do that 5 years before you're ready to sell, 5 years before you're ready to retire, and just trying to either build somebody up in the company or really start to think about how you need to bring people in to take over.
So with the succession planning, I expect there would also be a certain amount of opportunity, because people may be looking to start a business without realizing that there is someone in the area who is thinking about getting out of the business.
That is
and
right.
Do you find those kind of matchmaking opportunities in a sense, Liz?
Not as many as I would like to. Oftentimes, in fact, that's one of the things that the SBDC is looking at. And there was a time where we really didn't talk about succession planning, and a little bit like years ago, even the marketing piece of a business plan wasn't a big deal, and now it's almost like that could be as big as what a business plan is. But now when someone comes through the SBDC in a business plan, that succession planning and what their plans are for that is part of the business plan. And it really makes them sit and think, and oftentimes we'll see someone going into a partnership and think, it's, she was in my wedding and we'll be best friends forever, and that's not the case. And so we go along with it, but what if if someone were to move, or they had the opportunity for a different job that they liked more, how are you going to agree on a price for that percent that your partner owned? Or if something happened and someone were to pass away, and it were to go to someone else, if that was in their will, that it were to go to someone that maybe you didn't really want to work with. I mean, that's a very important piece that we really encourage all people to put into a business plan, and that's updated, at least annually, and paid attention to. It's a very important piece.
Which is another piece, I suppose. You see people who say they want to spend money on a number of things, but not on getting the legal help that they need, because it may be very easy to get into a partnership, but much of the partnership document is how would you ever get out of it, right?
That's right.
So getting in and getting out and having all of those pieces in place.
And people don't want to think about that. That's a negative to them. And so with a lot of encouragement, it makes them ask and visit with a partner or family member, and to be able to put that into place so that it is a smoother transition.
Sure. And Liz, you mentioned that marketing has become a much more important part of what we see small businesses in southwestern Minnesota looking at now as compared to 20 years ago. And Robin, you'd mentioned worker shortages. So I know that there's also there's no shortage of advice, let's say, from someone in the community. But with you starting small businesses or working with small businesses all the time, are there other huge changes that you've seen over the last 10 to 20 years that people might not have thought of 20 years ago, and now they're saying, "Oh my gosh, you mean you have to do that now?" Are you seeing those kind of those surprises for people, like worker shortages?
I think that one of the things, and this has been some years past, but I believe that with the aging population that we have in our region, that and as people get older, and sometimes because of them being with the company for a number of years, that oftentimes that they're forced out, so to speak, and end up being unemployed, and at their age, oftentimes, and the salary that they demand, they aren't as employable as someone perhaps just getting out of school or just starting in what particular occupation that would be. And so we, not so much now, but a few years back, saw a lot of people that were older starting their own business. Not that they wanted to, but they felt that them being self-employed, that they were creating that job for themselves and believed it could be at a level that was comparable to the job that they were let go from. And so they were always hesitant, and it was oftentimes money taken out of perhaps a retirement account or whatnot. And it was almost into a forced entrepreneurship that they maybe didn't really want, but felt that was their only option. And we still see some of that, but not as we did when there were more layoffs several years ago.
Sure. So in other words, as we got into the heart of the recession, 2009, 2010, you were seeing more of that than you are now.
I was just going to say credit history and so forth. I'm starting to see bankers and lenders look more and more in regards to their credit history and their credit reports, and that people are now starting to really think twice about making sure that they're clearing up some debt and trying to make that number look bigger. I think we're also seeing equity and collateral being something that's more open. Certainly we are looking for people to put a little skin in the game when they start businesses or expand businesses. Some have equity and some don't. Lenders are probably going to want around 20% equity into a project. When a revolving loan fund is in play, we're seeing more like 10 or 15%, but there's still some equity. And then collateral. Some of the folks coming to us maybe just don't realize that a lot of their assets business-wise, and sometimes on the personal side, we try not to get too much into that, are going to be tied up during the length of their loan.
And as part of that, they may also not necessarily understand what sort of legal structures are available to them.
That is correct.
Whether that's limited liability partnerships or S corps or C corps, and they may have to a learning curve there as well, I would expect.
Yeah, we certainly, when the applications come in and I'm trying to understand what the project is, I'm asking them, who's going to own the real estate? Are you going to lease it back to the business? Is it going to be in the business name? Is it a sole proprietor? And certainly we talk about that kind of on a high scale level, but they really need to talk to their accountants in regards to what best structure fits their needs.
And attorneys. We
Yes.
you know, one or the other, but both is probably
Exactly.
best. You can really, and we can provide the information, but we're not attorneys nor
No.
nor
No.
are we CPAs. And so I think that we do a good job of providing the information and discussing it. But I mean, the decision is theirs, and there's a lot to be looked at. I mean, and a lot to be considered in choosing what business entity your business will be. And we oftentimes will have people who have come through and they may be a sole proprietor when the reality is they shouldn't be. So we're quick to be able to point that out as well.
So you clearly have to help people, you know, get on that learning curve, do their research, figure out all the things that go into figuring out a small business, whether they're in Slayton or Marshall or some other community in that part of the state. Are there other trends that we should talk about that you think of the types of businesses that people are coming to you? Because some people might have a dream that it's retail, might be a restaurant, might be light manufacturing, might be an online service. What are some of the sort of interesting examples of businesses that you're seeing people come forward with?
I'm seeing more entrepreneur type programs, maybe in-home businesses and so forth come forth more than ever before. Sometimes location maybe doesn't really mean a lot to them when they know that they have the capacity to do online sales. I think that's really changed. Before it was the main street. I mean, that's where they were located, or in an industrial park. But I'm really seeing the location of the businesses change.
So in other words, someone may have, they're going to go online, they're going to do the business at home, they're not looking at that heavy capital investment, they're not thinking, oh, I've got that storefront I need to buy on Main Street. They're just figuring it out and keeping their operating costs initially pretty low, I would expect.
Right, and they're able to be flexible enough so that if they have children, they can go to their games and so forth, and they can work kind of at all hours. So,
Sure, or respond to requests all hours, because
Exactly.
you know the email may come in at 9 o'clock at night or whatever it may be, and maybe the other side of the world where the request comes in, and then they just respond to it from their phone or wherever they are.
That's right.
Liz, how about you?
I guess the first thought that I had when you asked the question was the mention of minority clients that we're starting to see more of in our region, and those that and oftentimes it's restaurants and clothing stores that they're looking for assistance with. And it seems that oftentimes the referral comes to the SBDC. When you mentioned earlier, are they coming in late, and should they have been, should they have talked to you beforehand? And oftentimes they have been given information that was partly right, but perhaps not all right. And they don't have an understanding of the difference in individual income tax versus sales tax. And the SBDC has worked really quite closely with a number of minority clients to help them understand that it's much different than it was in their country, where they were able to go and have a little cart and perhaps open on any road and no licensing and whatnot. And we've been able to work with them to have a better understanding of the rules and regulations in Minnesota. And we've really strived to be able to keep them to keep them on track as far as what the state of Minnesota expects from them, both licensing and tax-wise.
Sure, and of course, you mentioned earlier that lenders may also be the individuals who are referring people to you.
Yes.
Because they may see someone who comes in with an idea and they say, well, you're not quite there yet. Come back to me after you've got your business plan in place, or come after you've addressed these other issues, and then come back.
And most times they don't get to me until they've either talked to the SBDC or a primary lender. A few times I get those first kind of calls, but I do really need to make sure they have their projections and their business plan, and they need that primary lender. If that primary lender isn't going to be a part of the project, then I can't be as a gap financer. So,
Sure.
But in terms of minority, the latest applications for loans that I've gotten have probably been from minorities. I would say 50% of my last loans have been from minorities, and they are really willing to start something new. They're willing to kind of go out on a limb. Their family and friends are ready to back them up.
Yes.
The other piece that I'll say is that I probably have half of my loan applications that are business succession type things. Now, whether or not they knew that it was business succession, but they are buying businesses from somebody else. An uncle selling it to the nephew, the business owner selling it to a worker that has worked there for several years and has actually given them the opportunity to build some equity and insurance, so they already had some equipment prior to building or to becoming part of the business.
We've got about a minute left, so I'd just like to give people some direction on where to go, because of course we've got the Small Business Development Center and the Regional Development Commission, and there are other resources, and of course many other resources where people could go. So Liz, I'd like to start your suggestion for online resources for folks interested in starting a small business.
I would suggest SBA.gov, the Small Business Administration. I believe that whether you are looking at starting a business, they have just about anything and everything that someone would need. And you have to sign up, there's no fee, but they have anything from different tests to classes. I think you can find just about anything you would want to educate yourself on that process.
Robin, for you?
I would say that there are a lot of local resources, so don't forget about talking to your local EDAs, your county EDAs. Talk to me from the Regional Development Commission. Go out there and search, whether that be from the Economic Development Administration. Maybe they have some infrastructure grants that cities need to get your business going, or maybe it's online through DEED or statsamerica.org for data.
Okay. Good discussion. I'm afraid we're out of time, but I want to thank you both. So Robin Weiss of the Regional Development Commission in Slayton and Liz Struve of the Small Business Development Center in Marshall, thanks for joining us on Compass.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
having
for
us.
the invite.
That's all we have for this episode of Compass. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Do you have an idea for Compass? Send your suggestions and comments to yourtv@pioneer.org.